first, we turn it over to Trey Yingst in Israel with the latest from President Trump on the Iran conflict. Trey.
Yeah, Todd, Carly, good morning. Overnight, the Israelis and the Americans launched a new round of strikes against the Iranian capital of Tehran and other positions in western Iran. You can see in some of this video black smoke rising from the Iranian capital overnight.
Breaking news. Tehran is burning. Through the night, the Iranian capital was lit up by a relentless wave of Israeli airstrikes. Explosions visible across the skyline, columns of fire and black smoke rising from multiple locations simultaneously. The sound of detonations rolling through the streets of a city of nearly 10 million people who went to sleep under war and woke up the same way. At the same time, Iran fired back. Ballistic missiles and drones launched from Iranian territory toward Israeli cities. Sirens cutting through the night across Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and communities throughout central and northern Israel. Air defense systems lighting up the sky as interceptors race to meet the incoming barrage. Explosions overhead, people running for shelters in the dark. This is not a limited exchange. This is not a calculated, restrained tit-for-tat between two cautious adversaries trying to manage escalation. What happened overnight is a full-scale, simultaneous bilateral missile war between two of the most militarily capable nations in the Middle East, and it unfolded in real time on both sides of the conflict with the entire world watching. Iran is hitting Israel, Israel is hitting Iran, and neither side is blinking. The question that every military analyst, every intelligence agency, and every government on earth is asking right now is the same question it has been asking since this conflict began, but with new and urgent force after a night like this one. Where does this go from here? Tonight, we have the full breakdown. I'm Hannah Blake. This is Global News Diary. Let's get into it. The images coming out of Tehran overnight are among the most striking of this entire conflict. Multiple locations across the Iranian capital were struck in what Israeli military officials described as a coordinated, large-scale strike package targeting military infrastructure, command and control facilities, and installations connected to the Iranian regime's war-making capacity. The strikes were not clustered in a single area. They were spread across the city, a deliberate operational choice designed to overwhelm Iranian air defenses and emergency response systems simultaneously. Fires burned at multiple sites throughout the night. Residents reported hearing continuous explosions, not the isolated crack of a single strike, but the rolling, sustained thunder of a campaign in full operation. Footage captured from multiple vantage points showed the Tehran skyline illuminated by fire, the glow of burning facilities reflecting off the clouds above the city in the darkness. The Israeli military has been systematically working through a target list that goes beyond the military installations that dominated the early phases of Operation Epic Fury. Overnight strikes hit what Israeli officials described as command and control nodes, the communications infrastructure that allows the Iranian military to coordinate operations, issue orders, and maintain situational awareness across a dispersed force. Security installations connected to the IRGC were targeted. Facilities associated with the regime's remaining missile capabilities were struck. Each of these strikes serves a dual purpose. The immediate purpose is destruction, eliminating a specific military capability or piece of infrastructure. The strategic purpose is cumulative degradation, reducing, with every successive night of strikes, the Iranian military's ability to function as an organized, coordinated fighting force rather than a collection of isolated units acting on instinct and whatever assets remain within reach. The Iranian air defense system, already severely degraded by weeks of American and Israeli strikes, was largely unable to contest the Israeli strike packages. Aircraft flying over Tehran met minimal organized resistance. The suppression and paralysis that characterized the opening phase of this campaign has been so thorough that Israeli jets are now operating over the Iranian capital with a freedom of action that would have been unimaginable before Operation Epic Fury began. To understand why this particular overnight exchange happened, why it was larger, more sustained, and more clearly bilateral than many of the exchanges that preceded it, requires understanding the strategic moment that both Israel and Iran find themselves in right now. For Israel, the logic of escalation is straightforward. The campaign against Iran is working. the Iranian military has been degraded to a fraction of its former capability. The regime's leadership is in disarray, its supreme leader unseen and possibly incapacitated, its command and control network being systematically dismantled. This is the moment to press the advantage, to accelerate the degradation before Iran can adapt, regroup, or find ways to compensate for what it has lost. Every night of sustained strikes is another night in which the Iranian military's capacity to threaten Israel and American interests is further reduced. Stopping now, easing up now, would be giving a wounded adversary the breathing space to recover. For Iran, the logic of continuing to fire is darker and more desperate. The regime is losing this war militarily. That reality is not in serious dispute. But a regime that stops fighting, that ceases to respond to Israeli strikes with its own attacks, has accepted defeat in a way that may accelerate its internal collapse. As long as Iran is firing missiles at Israel, the regime can tell its supporters that it is fighting back, that it is resisting, that the Islamic Republic has not been broken. The moment Iran stops firing, that narrative collapses, and with it potentially whatever remaining cohesion holds the regime together. So both sides have powerful incentives to escalate, Israel to finish what it has started, Iran to demonstrate that it has not been finished. The result is a night like the one that just unfolded. Tehran in flames, sirens over Tel Aviv, interceptors in the sky over Jerusalem, and the world watching to see which side blinks first or whether neither does. Wars are fought by militaries and decided by strategy, but they are experienced by human beings. In Israel, the overnight barrage sent families into shelters in the hours before dawn. Parents waking children, gathering them in the darkness, moving to the reinforced rooms that Israeli residential construction has been required to incorporate for decades. Children who have grown up knowing what a siren means and how to move quickly to cover. That normalization of threat is itself a form of damage, one that does not appear in casualty figures but accumulates in the psychology of a nation living under permanent threat. The shrapnel injuries reported overnight, civilians treated in emergency rooms in the small hours of the morning, first responders picking through debris at impact sites by flashlight, are the human face of what Iran's cluster munitions do when they reach the ground. In Tehran, 10 million people have been living under Israeli airstrikes for weeks. Residents have developed the same grim routines as Israelis, listening for sounds, watching the sky, adjusting daily life around the reality of a war happening above and around them. The fires that burned through the night were not burning in empty buildings. They were burning in a city full of people who had nothing to do with the decisions of the regime that governs them. The Iranian civilians who oppose their government, who have been in the streets protesting it for years, shot and jailed and killed for opposing it, are living through this war in particular torment, struck by a foreign military they cannot control, governed by a regime they did not choose, caught between two sides of a conflict not of their making. Both sides of this war have human faces. Both sides are paying costs that extend far beyond military hardware. Any serious analysis of this conflict must hold that truth alongside the strategic one. The overnight exchange between Israel and Iran, Tehran in flames, sirens over Israeli cities, interceptors filling the sky, reveals several important things about the trajectory of this conflict. First, Iran still has the capacity to mount a significant overnight barrage. 90% degraded from peak is still a meaningful attack capability when that peak involved hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones. The regime is depleted, it is not disarmed. Second, Israel has effectively achieved air dominance over Iran. The ability to execute large-scale, sustained strikes over the Iranian capital against a country that has spent decades and billions of dollars building air defense systems specifically to prevent exactly this, demonstrates a level of air superiority that is historically unprecedented in this region. Israeli jets are operating over Tehran with a freedom of movement that no adversary has been able to contest. Third, the pattern of escalation is accelerating rather than de-escalating. The overnight exchange was larger and more sustained than previous exchanges. Both sides are pressing harder, not pulling back. The dynamics of a conflict in which both sides have strategic incentives to escalate, and neither side has yet reached the internal limit at which the costs of continuing outweigh the cost of stopping, are pushing the conflict toward an intensity that will eventually force a resolution one way or another. Fourth, the international community is watching and largely unable to affect the outcome. Diplomatic efforts to create a ceasefire or off-ramp have not produced results. The Italian and French negotiations with Iran, the Turkish calls for diplomacy, the various back-channel efforts being explored by regional actors, none of them have translated into any pause in the fighting. Both sides are choosing the battlefield over the negotiating table. The question of when and how this ends is still genuinely open, but the direction in which it is moving, escalating intensity, accelerating damage to Iranian military and economic infrastructure, growing international coalition to defend the Strait of Hormuz, mounting pressure on the Iranian regime from military, economic, and internal directions simultaneously, points toward a resolution that is coming faster than many observers initially expected. As daylight broke over Tehran and Tel Aviv, a city in flames and a city emerging from shelters, the question of what comes next dominated every conversation among analysts, officials, and policymakers watching this conflict. On the military dimension, the trajectory is established. American and Israeli forces will continue striking. Strike packages launch every hour. Israeli jets operating with effective air dominance over Iran will continue pressing that advantage. Iran's defense industrial base will continue to be dismantled. Its remaining missile and drone capabilities will continue to be degraded. On the economic dimension, Karg Island has opened a decisive new front. The United States chose in its initial strikes to hit military targets rather than the oil infrastructure itself, explicitly conditioning that restraint on Iranian behavior at the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's retaliatory strikes on Gulf oil facilities are testing that condition directly. On the diplomatic dimension, the international coalition of warships assembling to keep the strait open demonstrates that Iran's attempt to weaponize that choke point has failed politically as well as militarily. The world is not acquiescing. And internally, the desertions, the Iranian civilians supplying Israel with targeting intelligence, the protests continuing despite brutal suppression, the pressure from below keeps building alongside the pressure from above. A night like the one that just passed is not the end of this conflict, but it may be one of the last nights before the balance tips irreversibly, before the regime runs out of missiles, money, organizational coherence, and the will to keep fighting. That moment is coming. The question is only when. Here is today's question, and after a night like this one, it feels more urgent than ever. Tehran was in flames overnight while Israel absorbed an Iranian missile barrage simultaneously. Both sides are escalating. Do you think we are witnessing the final weeks of this conflict or the beginning of a much longer and more destructive war? And what does a genuine end to this look like? Drop your answer in the comments. This community consistently brings the sharpest analysis on this platform. The best responses get featured in the next video. If this breakdown gave you the full picture of what happened overnight, the military, the human cost, and what comes next, hit that like button right now. 2 seconds, that is all it takes. Subscribe if you are not already here. We cover every development in this war as it happens with the depth, context, and honesty that the story demands. Turn on notifications. After a night like this, the next development could come at any moment. You do not want to be behind. Share this video. This is a night that the world needs to understand. Send it to someone who needs the full picture. I'm Hannah Blake. This is Global News Diary. We will be back the moment this story develops further. Stay sharp, stay informed.